Welcome back to our channel. Breaking overnight, Los Angeles was shaken by devastating news. Police confirmed they were investigating the deaths of legendary director Rob Reiner and his wife, producer Michelle Reiner, who were found dead inside their Brentwood home. Within hours, the story spread across major news outlets, sending shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond. For decades, Rob Reiner had been known not only for his work, but for his strong family image, making the news even harder to believe. Neighbors described a heavy police presence outside the quiet street as investigators worked behind closed gates. Authorities confirmed the case was being treated as a homicide, but early details were limited. Fans and colleagues struggled to process how a couple admired for their warmth and stability could meet such a tragic end at home. As questions grew, one thing became clear. This tragedy was far deeper than anyone initially realized. For many hours after the news broke, Tracy Reiner said nothing. While the world reacted in disbelief, she remained overwhelmed, trying to process a loss that felt impossible to understand. When she finally spoke publicly, her voice was soft and unsteady. She admitted she still couldn't accept that her parents were gone. "I'm in total shock," she said, explaining that the reality felt distant, as if it were happening to someone else. Tracy shared that Rob and Michelle Reiner were more than well-known names. To her, they were stability. They were the people who made problems feel smaller and life feel safe. Losing them both at once left her feeling ungrounded, unsure of where to stand emotionally. She described moments where she caught herself expecting a phone call or message from them, only to remember they would never come. As she spoke, Tracy revealed that grief wasn't the only emotion she was dealing with. Confusion and fear sat alongside it. She said her mind kept replaying the days leading up to the tragedy, searching for meaning in ordinary moments that now felt heavy. Conversations that once seemed harmless now felt important. Silences that felt normal now felt loud. She admitted that speaking out was not easy. Part of her wanted privacy, but another part felt it was important for people to know who her parents truly were beyond the headlines. Rob, she said, was calm, thoughtful, and always present. Michelle was warmth and strength, the person who held the family together when things became difficult. Together, they created a home built on patience and love. Tracy also acknowledged a growing sense of regret. She questioned herself quietly, wondering if there were things she should have said or done differently. Not because she believed she could have changed everything, but because the weight of unanswered questions now followed her everywhere. By the end of her statement, it was clear Tracy wasn't trying to explain the tragedy. She was simply sharing her pain. What the public saw was not a Hollywood figure, but a daughter in shock, standing in the middle of a loss too deep to fully understand, beginning to face a future without the two people who had always been her foundation. As Tracy continued speaking, her shock slowly turned into regret. She revealed that what happened on December 14th didn't come without signs. Weeks before the tragedy, there had been a moment that stayed with her, even though she didn't fully understand it at the time. Looking back, she now believes it was a warning, quiet, unsettling, and easy to dismiss. Tracy explained that her younger brother, Nick Reiner, had said something that felt wrong. It wasn't loud or aggressive, and that's why it didn't raise alarms right away. He spoke in a tired, almost empty tone, as if he had already given up on something important. Tracy said she remembers thinking he sounded defeated, not dangerous. At the time, she told herself he was simply overwhelmed, carrying the same struggles he had faced many times before. She admitted that the family had grown used to emotional moments like this. Nick had struggled for years, and serious conversations were part of their routine. Every difficult phase came with promises to do better and hopes that things would finally settle. Because of that history, Tracy assumed this was just another low point. She didn't see it as a sign of something worse coming. What disturbed her most, even now, was how calm Nick seemed. There was no panic in his voice, no urgency that felt like a cry for help. Instead, he spoke as if something had already reached its end. Tracy said that calmness haunted her later. "It felt like he had already accepted something," she explained, "and I didn't understand what that meant." She debated whether to tell her parents, but doubt held her back. With the holidays approaching and emotions already tense, she didn't want to create more stress. She convinced herself she was overthinking it. That fear, she believed, came from exhaustion, not danger. After the tragedy, that moment returned to her with painful clarity. Tracy realized the warning hadn't been dramatic or obvious. It came quietly, hidden inside familiar patterns the family had learned to overlook, and by the time its meaning became clear, it was already too late. Tracy said the moment that haunted her most happened in early December 2025, just days before everything collapsed. That evening had started normally, with a quiet family dinner at her parents' Brentwood home. Nothing felt unusual at the table. After dinner, Nick sent her a short message asking to talk privately. He didn't explain why, only that it was important and needed to happen right away. Although she felt uneasy, she agreed. They met inside the small guest house behind the main home, where Nick had been staying during another difficult period in his life. Tracy remembered how quiet the room felt, almost heavy. Nick didn't greet her warmly, there was no small talk, no easing into the conversation. He went straight to the point and said he needed money urgently. He didn't mention an amount or explain the full reason, only that everything depended on it. When Tracy asked what was going on, Nick began pacing the room. He sat down, stood up, then paced again. His hands shook slightly as he admitted that his debts had been building for months. He said he had already asked friends and old contacts for help, but no one was answering him anymore. "People think I'll always be saved," he said quietly, "but now nobody's reaching out." At first, his tone wasn't angry. It was tired, almost empty. That confused Tracy. She had seen him emotional before, but this felt different. As the conversation continued, Nick stopped talking about money and started talking about their parents. His voice changed. It became cold and distant. He spoke about Rob and Michelle not as parents, but as people who controlled his life and delayed things that should have been handled long ago. Tracy said that was the moment something felt wrong. The room felt tense, and Nick's words came faster, as if years of frustration were spilling out at once. Then, suddenly, he went quiet. The silence made Tracy uncomfortable. She felt a strong instinct that she needed to leave. When her phone rang, she used it as an excuse to step outside. She walked away without looking back, her hands shaking as she reached her car. Even after leaving, the fear didn't fade. That night stayed with her, replaying in her mind, long after she told herself it was nothing more than another difficult family moment. After that night, Tracy said she couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation had gone far beyond money. At first, she tried to convince herself it was just another desperate moment, the kind her family had faced many times before. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became that something had shifted. Money was no longer just a problem to be solved. It had turned into a symbol of control, resentment, and deep emotional wounds. Tracy explained that finances had always been a sensitive issue when it came to Nick. Every request carried weight, and every limit felt personal. When help was offered, Nick saw it as proof he was still trusted. When it was delayed or questioned, he felt judged and pushed aside. Over time, those feelings built up quietly, turning into bitterness he struggled to hide. During the guesthouse conversation, Nick didn't speak like someone asking for help. He spoke like someone who believed something had been taken from him. Tracy remembered how final his words sounded, as if he felt owed rather than supported. He talked about time running out and patience being gone, which made her uneasy. It felt less like a crisis and more like a breaking point. What troubled Tracy most was how Nick spoke about their parents. He no longer described them as people trying to help him. Instead, he talked about them as obstacles, as figures who had power over his life. That emotional distance frightened her. It suggested that something inside him had hardened, replacing trust with blame. Looking back, Tracy realized this change didn't happen overnight. Years of disappointment, comparison, and pressure had slowly reshaped how Nick saw his family. Money became the focus of that pain, but it wasn't the true cause. It was pride, insecurity, and the feeling of living in someone else's shadow. By the time Tracy replayed everything after the tragedy, she understood that logic no longer mattered in those moments. Once money turned emotional, every conversation felt like a fight. Boundaries felt like rejection. Love felt like control. And that shift, she now believes, was one of the most dangerous signs they failed to fully recognize. Tracy said there was a moment during that conversation when her body reacted before her mind could fully understand why. As Nick continued speaking, his movements became restless. He kept shifting his position, pacing the room, then stopping suddenly. His hands clenched and unclenched, and his eyes avoided hers. Nothing he said was openly threatening, but the energy around him felt unstable. She described it as a sudden sense of pressure, like the room had grown smaller. Nick stepped closer while talking, lowering his voice. It wasn't anger that scared her. It was how detached he seemed, as if he had separated himself from reality. Tracy realized she no longer felt like she was talking to her brother. Something about him felt unfamiliar, unpredictable, and emotionally distant. Inside, her heart started racing. She tried to remain calm, choosing her words carefully and avoiding anything that might escalate the situation. Outwardly, she listened. Inwardly, one thought kept repeating in her mind, "Leave now." She didn't fully understand the fear, but she trusted it. Years of family tension had taught her when to speak and when to stay silent. This time, silence felt safer. When her phone rang, Tracy said it felt like an escape she hadn't planned. She answered immediately, using the call as a reason to step away. Nick didn't stop her. He didn't question it. He simply stood there, quiet, watching. That silence stayed with her longer than his words ever did. She walked out of the guest house quickly, resisting the urge to look back. By the time she reached her car, her hands were shaking. Sitting behind the wheel, she tried to steady her breathing and convince herself she was overreacting. But the fear followed her home. It lingered in her chest, refusing to fade. For days afterward, Tracy questioned herself. She wondered if fear without proof was enough to matter. She debated warning her parents but doubted her own instincts. She told herself Nick had acted this way before and nothing terrible had happened. Love and time had always brought things back to balance. After the tragedy, Tracy understood the truth. That fear had been her intuition trying to protect her. It saved her that night, but it couldn't undo what was already unfolding. And realizing that has stayed with her ever since. December 14th, 2025 started quietly, without any sign of what was about to happen. Tracy said the morning felt ordinary, the kind of day where life moves forward without pause. There were no missed calls, no warnings, nothing to suggest that everything was about to change. It wasn't until later in the afternoon that her phone began lighting up with alerts from news outlets, reporting police activity at a home in Brentwood. At first, Tracy didn't react. Los Angeles is a city full of headlines, and police responses are not unusual. But as details slowly emerged, a sense of unease settled in. Then the names were confirmed: Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner. Tracy said her mind went completely blank. She reread the words over and over, unable to connect them to her parents. It felt unreal, like a mistake that would be corrected any second. As the news spread, police confirmed that 2 adults had been found deceased inside the residence and that the case was being treated as a homicide. Hearing that word felt unbearable. Homicide didn't belong anywhere near her family. Her parents were the people who believed in patience, understanding, and love, even when situations became difficult. The idea that violence had entered their home felt impossible to accept. In that moment, memories rushed back with painful clarity. Tracy said her thoughts immediately returned to the conversation in the guest house. The urgency in Nick's voice, the coldness when he spoke about their parents, and the fear she couldn't explain all came flooding back. What once felt confusing now felt terrifyingly clear. Guilt followed quickly. She questioned every decision she had made in the days before. Should she have spoken up? Should she have trusted her instincts more? Those questions repeated in her mind as messages poured in from friends and family she couldn't yet face. By the end of that day, Tracy understood a painful truth. December 14th wasn't just the day her parents died. It was the day every ignored warning revealed its meaning. The collapse hadn't been sudden. It had been building quietly for years, and now her family was left to face the reality of a loss that would define their lives forever. As the shock of December 14th settled in, Tracy said she began looking back at her brother's life with a painful clarity she never wanted. Nick Reiner had been born into one of Hollywood's most respected families, surrounded by success, comfort, and opportunity. From the outside, it looked like a dream life. But Tracy explained that privilege did not protect him from inner struggles. In many ways, it made them harder to escape. From a young age, Nick showed signs of restlessness. He was impulsive, easily frustrated, and struggled with limits. Tracy said he often felt overwhelmed by expectations, especially growing up under the shadow of a famous father and a legendary family name. While others admired that legacy, Nick felt trapped by it. He believed he was constantly being compared, measured, and judged, even when no one said it out loud. As a teenager, Nick began pulling away from the family. He gravitated toward risky behavior and unstable social circles, searching for something that made him feel in control. Tracy said he wasn't acting out for attention. He was trying to quiet a mind that never felt calm. Over time, that search led him down darker paths, including substance abuse and repeated struggles with addiction. Rehab became a recurring part of his life. Sometimes he stayed for months, sometimes only weeks. Each return home brought hope that this time would be different. For short periods, things improved. Nick would seem focused, calmer, even optimistic, but the pattern always returned. Frustration built quickly, rules felt suffocating, and he would pull away again. Tracy explained that what hurt most was how aware Nick was of his struggles. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't know how to fix it. He often spoke about his mind being too loud, about feeling like he was constantly fighting himself. That internal battle followed him everywhere, shaping his choices and damaging his relationships. Looking back, Tracy said Nick's past wasn't a straight path toward tragedy. It was a long cycle of pain, effort, hope, and collapse. A cycle the family tried to break for years, believing that love and support would eventually be enough. Tracy said that as Nick grew older, his struggles became harder to separate from his identity. What once felt like phases slowly turned into a repeating cycle the family couldn't escape. Addiction was no longer something that appeared and disappeared. It became a constant presence, shaping Nick's behavior, his relationships, and the way he viewed himself. Each time Nick entered rehab, the family allowed themselves to hope. They believed structure, support, and time would finally bring lasting change. For a while, it often worked. Nick would return calmer, more focused, and determined to rebuild his life. He talked about fresh starts, new plans, and learning from his mistakes. Tracy said those moments were convincing enough to believe in again. But stability never lasted long. Small frustrations quickly turned into anger. Rules felt like control. Advice felt like judgment. Nick struggled with patience and became restless when progress felt slow. Before long, the old patterns returned. He would pull away, disappear emotionally, and eventually relapse. Each fall felt harder than the one before. Tracy explained that the most painful part was watching Nick become exhausted by his own failures. He wasn't careless about them. He carried deep shame, even when he didn't show it. Instead of asking for help openly, he often masked his pain with defensiveness or blame. That made it difficult for anyone to reach him. Over time, addiction stopped being the only issue. It blended with frustration, resentment, and a sense of being misunderstood. Nick began believing that no matter what he did, he would always be seen as the problem. That belief pushed him further away from the people trying hardest to support him. The family tried different approaches. Sometimes they were gentle. Other times they pushed for boundaries. Nothing seemed to work for long. Tracy said it felt like watching someone drown while reaching out again and again, never knowing if your hand would be pulled under with them. Looking back, she described Nick's life as a painful loop. Hope followed by collapse. Promises followed by regret. And with each cycle, the emotional damage spread wider, slowly pulling the entire family into a struggle they never knew how to end. As Nick tried to distance himself from his past struggles, another problem quietly took its place. Tracy said the family didn't notice it right away because, at first, it didn't look dangerous. Gambling entered Nick's life slowly, disguised as entertainment. Casual games, friendly bets, small amounts that didn't raise concern. For a while, it seemed harmless, even normal. But over time, the habit grew. Nick started believing luck could fix what effort hadn't. He talked about winning big, about one lucky moment that would erase years of mistakes. Tracy explained that this mindset gave him temporary hope. It made him feel powerful again, in control of his future. But that feeling never lasted. Losses followed quickly. One bad night turned into another. Instead of stopping, Nick chased the losses, convinced the next win was just around the corner. Tracy said this was when his behavior changed. He became secretive, defensive, and increasingly desperate. Money disappeared without explanation, and questions were met with anger. The family later discovered that Nick had borrowed money from friends and contacts without being honest about why. Each loan came with promises to pay it back soon. When that didn't happen, the pressure intensified. Nick felt cornered, ashamed, and furious at the same time. Gambling didn't just drain his finances, it drained his stability. Tracy said Nick began to see gambling as his last chance. He spoke about it with obsession, repeating the same idea again and again. One win fixes everything. That belief trapped him. Instead of facing the damage, he doubled down, hoping luck would succeed where help had failed. As debts grew, so did his emotional volatility. Conversations about money became explosive. He felt judged even when no one accused him. The shame he carried turned into resentment, especially toward those who tried to stop him. Looking back, Tracy said gambling wasn't separate from Nick's past struggles. It was an extension of them. Another attempt to escape pain without facing it directly. And just like before, it promised relief, but delivered deeper destruction instead. Through every struggle, Tracy said one thing never changed: her parents' refusal to give up on their son. Rob and Michelle Reiner believed deeply in patience. Even when exhaustion showed on their faces, they chose understanding over anger. They didn't see Nick as a problem to remove, but as a child who needed support, even when that support came at a cost to their own peace. Their Brentwood home slowly became a place of constant effort. Therapy appointments, late-night conversations, and emergency plans filled their schedules. Tracy explained that her parents adjusted their entire lives around Nick's needs. Work commitments were moved, travel plans were canceled. Everything became secondary to making sure he was safe and supported. To outsiders, they still looked like a calm Hollywood couple. Inside the home, they were fighting a quiet, emotional battle every day. Rob believed in showing up, even when nothing seemed to change. He listened more than he spoke, hoping that calm would eventually break through. Michelle carried the emotional weight in her own way. She was the one who smoothed over conflicts, who reminded everyone to stay gentle, who believed that love could still reach Nick if they didn't shut the door. Tracy said there were moments when her parents questioned themselves. They wondered if they were being too soft or too strict. Professionals offered different advice, often conflicting. Some encouraged distance, others urged more structure. Rob and Michelle tried everything, often unsure if they were helping or making things worse. Still, they never stopped trying. Even after setbacks, they welcomed Nick back without punishment. They rearranged the guest house to give him space but kept him close. Each return came with hope that this time would be different. Tracy said her parents told themselves that starting over was worth it if it meant protecting their son. Looking back, she described their love as relentless. It didn't fade with disappointment or failure. Rob and Michelle believed that giving up was never an option. And in the end, Tracy said, that unwavering love defined them more than anything else they ever did. Over time, Tracy said the constant pressure began to change the entire family dynamic. What started as concern slowly turned into tension. Conversations became careful and guarded. Family gatherings no longer felt relaxed. Everyone was carrying worry, but no one knew how to talk about it without making things worse. The love was still there, but it was weighed down by fear and exhaustion. As Nick's problems grew more intense, the emotional strain spread to every corner of the family. Tracy explained that each sibling responded differently. Some tried to stay close, believing presence might help. Others pulled back, not out of anger, but out of emotional survival. Watching the same cycle repeat became too painful for some to face directly. Trust also began to suffer. Simple decisions turned into debates. Money, boundaries, and support were no longer just practical matters. They became emotional landmines. Tracy said it felt like everyone was walking on thin ice, afraid that one wrong word could trigger another crisis. Over time, silence replaced honesty. The family also struggled with guilt. Each person questioned their role, wondering if they were doing too much or not enough. Tracy admitted there were moments when protecting her own peace felt selfish, even necessary. Loving someone deeply while feeling powerless to help them created a constant inner conflict. Holidays and milestones, once joyful, became complicated. Smiles were forced. Laughter felt incomplete. Even in happy moments, there was an unspoken awareness that something fragile could break at any time. Tracy said that tension never fully left the room. As the years passed, emotional distance quietly grew. The family wasn't torn apart by one argument or one event. It happened slowly, through repeated stress and unresolved fear. Everyone was trying to hold things together in their own way, but the weight was too heavy to carry forever. Looking back, Tracy described this period as a slow unraveling. Not the absence of love, but the presence of constant strain. By the time the final tragedy arrived, the family had already been worn down by years of silent battles they never imagined would end this way. Tracy said that as time passed, money stopped being just a practical concern and became something far more emotional. It represented trust, power, and control inside the family. For Nick, every financial discussion felt personal. Support felt like proof of belief, while limits felt like rejection. That mindset slowly shaped how he saw everyone around him, especially his parents. She explained that Nick often believed he was treated differently, even when that wasn't true. He felt watched, judged, and compared to others, convinced that every decision was a sign of doubt in him. Tracy said those feelings grew stronger whenever finances came up. Even calm conversations quickly turned tense, as if he was already prepared for a fight before it began. Over time, resentment took root. Nick began to speak less about his own choices and more about what he felt had been denied to him. He talked about control, about feeling stuck in a life shaped by other people's decisions. Tracy said this belief allowed him to avoid facing his own responsibility. Instead of seeing help as care, he saw it as leverage being held over him. Inheritance and future security became unspoken fears. Although no one discussed it openly, Tracy admitted the tension was there. Nick worried about his place in the family, about what he deserved, and about whether he was trusted. Those worries fed his anger, especially during moments of stress. He felt he had to fight to be taken seriously. Tracy said the hardest part was watching how resentment changed Nick's tone. He became colder, more defensive, and less willing to listen. Conversations felt transactional instead of emotional. Love was still present, but it struggled to reach him through the walls he had built. Looking back, Tracy realized that resentment didn't appear suddenly. It grew quietly through years of disappointment and insecurity. Money was only the surface issue. Beneath it was a deep fear of being powerless, forgotten, or left behind. And once that fear took hold, it reshaped everything, pushing Nick further away from the family that was still trying to hold him close.